The vast blackness of space stretched endlessly before Captain Elara Ward, the stark void occasionally interrupted by the glimmer of distant stars. Her warship, HSS Null, floated silently in the shadow of an uncharted system, the hum of its ancient engines the only sound within the command deck. The Null was not much more than a relic, a ship forged from technology far too advanced for its time, yet left abandoned for years. Humanity had moved on, leaving behind the once promising project to wither and collect dust. Yet there it was, in the middle of nowhere, its once gleaming hull now a dull testament to the Federation's forgotten ambitions. Elara stood at the helm, her hands clasped behind her back as she surveyed the barren void. The crew was sparse. Those who had stayed on the Null had become something of misfits, individuals seeking to escape the noise of the Federation's bustling core, people whose careers had stagnated or been overlooked entirely. Elara was no different. Her rise through the ranks had been swift, but now, far from the heart of Federation power, she could not help but feel insignificant. She wasn't leading an elite strike force or navigating the front lines of an intergalactic war. Instead, she was maintaining a ship that barely mattered in the grand scope of things. Her first officer, Jax, a grizzled veteran of a dozen different assignments, stepped beside her. His face, weathered from years of service, bore the same tired look that Elara had grown accustomed to. "Captain," Jax's voice broke the silence, his tone flat. "Sensors are clear. We're still a few days out from the next scheduled recon. Nothing out here but emptiness." Elara nodded, her eyes fixed on the stars ahead. The emptiness was something she had come to appreciate, a reprieve from the political machinations and endless meetings that marked her time in Federation command. Out here, in the uninhabited stretch of the galaxy, she could simply exist, alone with her thoughts. But it wouldn't stay that way for long. Without warning, the sensors blinked to life, a strange pulse rippling through the silence. Elara's fingers danced across the control panel and the ship's automated systems hummed to life. "What the hell?" Jax muttered, leaning over to inspect the readings. A signal. A faint one, but unmistakable. And not from any known Federation source. "Captain, that's not one of ours," Jax said, his voice tinged with suspicion. "Could be a rogue ship or something more dangerous. Prepare for a closer scan," Elara ordered, her voice steady despite the sudden rise in her pulse. The Null slowly drifted closer to the source of the signal, the silence of space pressing against them like a heavy cloak. Elara's thoughts raced. A fleet? A hidden outpost? She couldn't be sure, but the Federation had made it clear. Any unregistered presence in this part of space was an immediate threat. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary anomaly. As the ship closed the gap, Elara stood motionless, her gaze never leaving the screen. Jax's hands flew across the console, trying to get a clearer reading, but the signal was weak, flickering as if trying to hide itself. Whatever it was well concealed, hiding in the dark recesses of the galaxy. "Cap, I've got a visual," Jax said, a note of disbelief creeping into his voice. The scanner flickered to life, revealing a sight that no one on the crew could have expected. A fleet, massive, heavily armed, and alien. Elara's breath caught in her throat. These ships were nothing like the Federation's. Sleek, jagged, structures that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their hulls adorned with designs that were both alien and unsettling. There were dozens of them, all in formation, hovering in the dead quiet of space like some ancient hunting pack waiting for prey. "Bring up the tactical analysis," Elara ordered, though she already knew what she would see, something far beyond their current capabilities. Jax's fingers hesitated on the console. I don't know what this is, Captain. The readings are off the charts. Some of the ships are almost cloaked. We can't get a lock." Elara's mind raced. A fleet that shouldn't exist. One that was hidden, waiting, perhaps for something, and they had stumbled into its path. "We need to report this," Jax continued, his voice urgent. "We can't handle this alone." Elara didn't answer right away. The Null was no warship. It was a prototype, experimental. Most of its weapon systems were still untested, its systems barely operational. She had been trained to lead, but not into a situation like this. They were out of their depth. Still, there was something in her gut that told her this wasn't just another reconnaissance mission. Something about this fleet, the way it was positioned, its technology, it was far too precise to be an accident. They weren't just scouting, they were waiting. The room fell into an uneasy silence, the weight of the unknown pressing in from all sides. Elara's mind flickered back to the days when the Null had been just a project, a dream that had been abandoned long ago. If this fleet was anything close to the weaponry the Federation had been anticipating, then her ship, this relic of forgotten ambition, might be the only chance they had. "Prepare the ship for combat readiness," Elara ordered, her voice firm now, the weight of command settling over her shoulders. "We're going in." The HSS Null began its slow, cautious approach. To the alien fleet, its once obsolete weapon systems powered up for the first time in years. The crew, uncertain but resolute, moved into position, aware that this would be a moment that would define not just their mission, but their place in the galaxy. As they advanced, the tension in the air was palpable. Something was about to happen. Something that would change everything. The stars glinted like distant pinpricks of light as the HSS Null glided toward the alien fleet, its engines purring with a hum that was oddly reassuring. Elara stood at the helm, staring at the looming ships on the scanner, now mere kilometers away. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, each vessel sleek and angular, their hulls black as void, save for faint etchings of strange symbols. It wasn't just the size or appearance of the ships that unsettled her. It was the way they seemed to flicker in and out of existence as though their very presence defied the laws of physics. They didn't belong here, in this sector of space. And yet, here they were. "Cap, I'm getting more data." Jax's voice broke into her thoughts, his tone tight with disbelief. "These ships, they're not Federation, not even anything close to what we've seen before. The tech, it's far beyond anything we have. I'm trying to get a clearer scan, but it's like they're shielding themselves from us. This isn't just a fleet. This is something else." Elara's eyes narrowed. "Can we make contact?" Jax's fingers flew over the console. "I don't know if they'd even respond. The signal we picked up, it wasn't a typical distress beacon. It was something more complex, too structured, almost as if they were waiting for us. Waiting for them." The thought sent a shiver down Elara's spine. But there was no time for fear. She had a mission, and she had to act. "Prepare the communication systems," she ordered. "We'll try to send a standard Federation greeting. If they're hostile, we'll need to know what we're up against." The hum of the ship's comm systems came to life, the crackle of static the only response. Elara's pulse quickened. This wasn't a simple reconnaissance anymore. It was something far larger, something that had the potential to change the balance of power in the galaxy. Elara's eyes flicked to the tactical screen, where the alien fleet was now clearly visible. A formation of ships moving in perfect unison, each one in its place like a well-rehearsed dance. They were not acting like an invading force, they were acting like they were waiting for something, and it made her uneasy. "Cap, I'm picking up something," Jax muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the data. "It's a signal, but it's different. This isn't just a signal from the fleet. There's something else coming from the lead ship. I can't make sense of it." The lead ship, the largest and most imposing of the fleet, suddenly flashed. Brighter, a surge of energy pulsing from its core. It was as if the ship was coming alive, reacting to their presence. And then, without warning, a series of blinding lights erupted from its hull, casting a brilliant glow across the void. Elara's heart skipped a beat as the Null's hull began to shake with the intensity of the energy discharges. "Brace for impact," Elara shouted, her voice commanding but filled with an edge of urgency. Her hands slammed down on the console, trying to stabilize the ship's trajectory. The crew scrambled to respond, each person moving with precision and training. The first blast struck, a wave of energy that vibrated through the null like a thunderclap in the void. The shields flared brightly, absorbing most of the damage, but the impact sent a tremor through the ship. Elara gritted her teeth, her hands firm on the controls. "Report," she barked. "We've lost shields on starboard," Jack shouted, his fingers racing across the panels. "We're taking hull damage. They've got some kind of weapons that—" Before he could finish, another burst of energy hit. This time, the null shuddered violently, throwing Elara off balance. She stumbled, catching herself against the command chair. "Engineering!" Elara snapped. "Report!" The voice of the chief engineer crackled over the intercom. "Captain, we've got structural damage. We're holding steady for now, but we can't keep taking hits like this." "Return fire!" Elara ordered, her voice sharp. She didn't have time to think about how the null was even supposed to respond in. A fight, this wasn't supposed to be a combat ship after all, but she had no choice. She had to fight back, had to find a way to survive. The weapon systems hummed to life, and the null's forward cannons opened fire. The beams of concentrated energy shot into the darkness, striking one of the alien ships. The enemy ship recoiled, but it didn't go down. The weapons they were facing were far more advanced than anything the null was equipped with. "We're not getting through their shields," Jax muttered, frustration clear in his voice. "They're too strong. We need to figure out a way to break through or we're dead." Elara's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. There had to be something. Anything. She scanned the tactical display, looking for a weakness, a vulnerability in the alien ships, and then she saw it, barely visible, a flicker of light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the lead ship's energy surges. "Focus fire on the lead ship," Elara commanded, a cold determination settling over her. "Aim for that weak spot." The crew responded instantly, and the null's weapons fired again, this time targeting the flickering weakness in the lead ship's defenses. The blast hit and the alien ship bucked violently, its shields flaring before they collapsed. For a brief moment, Elara allowed herself to hope, until the alien fleet began to move. The momentary pause was over. The fleet accelerated toward them in perfect synchronization, a wave of death descending from all sides. The null was surrounded, its escape routes cut off. Elara's mind raced, calculating their chances. "There's no way out," Jax muttered under his breath, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Elara didn't respond. There was only one thing to do now: fight and survive. The Federation would come for them, surely. But for now, it was just her ship and her crew, alone in the depths of space, facing a force they had no hope of defeating. Or so it seemed. The situation had escalated beyond anything Elara had anticipated. The alien fleet, far from being an unknown anomaly, had now revealed its true threat. The HSS Null was hopelessly outmatched, but the fight had only just begun. The choices Elara made in these next moments would define her crew's survival, or their annihilation. The HSS Null was shaking from the continuous barrage of energy blasts, but it held together, its hull groaning with the strain. Elara's heart pounded in her chest as she gripped the control panel, the weight of the situation settling over her like an oppressive fog. The crew, though seasoned, was starting to show signs of fear. This was no longer a routine mission. This was survival. And the odds were rapidly stacking against them. "Shields at 20%, Jax shouted, his voice urgent. "We can't keep this up much longer, Captain." Elara's mind raced. The alien fleet had her ship cornered, each ship methodically closing the distance, their weapons relentlessly pounding the Null's weakened defenses. The Null had always been a prototype, its weapons and shields untested in real combat. No one had ever expected a battle like this. They had never expected a battle at all. "Can we return fire?" Elara asked, her voice steady but betraying the undercurrent of anxiety that simmered beneath the surface. "We've lost the forward cannons. We're relying on secondary turrets, but they're underpowered. There's no way we can break through their shields with what we've got," Jax replied, his brow furrowed as he analyzed the data. A quick glance at the tactical display confirmed his assessment. The alien fleet was enormous, too large for the Null to engage with its current capabilities. Elara was faced with a grim realization. They had no chance of winning this fight, not outright. "Engineering," Elara barked, her voice firm as ever. "How long until we can re-establish the forward weapons array?" A beat of silence before the chief engineer's voice crackled through the comm system. "At least 10 minutes, Captain, if we're lucky. But that's assuming we don't lose more systems before then." 10 minutes, Elara muttered, her mind already calculating their options. She had no intention of waiting to be obliterated. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Jax. I need you to find a way to create an opening. Anything." Jax's fingers danced across the console, his eyes darting between the tactical data and the status of the ship's systems. "I'm working on it, Cap, but they're one step ahead of us. Whatever these ships are, they're built to anticipate movements before they happen." The alien fleet wasn't just reacting to the Null's movements, it was predicting them. Every time the Null attempted to break free of their encirclement, the alien ships adjusted their formation, closing the gap even faster. They were being toyed with, and Elara hated it. "We're not getting out of here without some kind of advantage," she muttered under her breath. "What's that signal we picked up earlier? You said it was from their lead ship. Can you decrypt it?" Jax hesitated, fingers pausing mid-air as he processed her question. I don't know. It's not a standard Federation code, not even close, but..." He frowned, clearly grappling with the data in front of him. "There's a pattern here, something familiar. It almost looks like..." Before Jax could finish, a violent shudder rocked the Null. The ship's lights flickered and alarms blared as another wave of energy slammed into them. Elara braced herself against the console, heart pounding. She could feel the ship, buckling beneath her feet. "Damage report," she barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Portside hull integrity at 10%. We're losing atmosphere in sections," came the response from the engineering team. The crew scrambled to their stations, fighting against the inevitable. Elara's thoughts were spinning, each one more desperate than the last. She couldn't let her ship fall like this, not without understanding why, not without knowing who or what had orchestrated this attack. "Jax, I need answers now." Elara's voice was sharp, almost pleading. She knew time was running out, but this was more than just a fight for survival. It was a question of existence itself. The alien fleet wasn't just here to destroy them. It was here to make a statement, and Elara had to understand that statement, if she had any hope of getting out of this alive. Jax's fingers hovered over the console, his mind working furiously. "I think I've got it," he muttered. His eyes widened as the data came together in a sudden revelation. "This signal, it's not an attack command, it's a message." "A message," Elara echoed, confusion knitting her brow. Jax's face was pale, his eyes distant. "It's not meant for us. It's meant for someone else. Someone who's been waiting for us." Elara felt a coldness spread through her veins. "Waiting for us? What are you talking about?" Jax's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the shriek of the damaged ship. "These ships, they're not a fleet, they're a signal, a call. They've been waiting for the Null to respond. They want us." Elara's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just about a fight. It was about something far deeper. "What do you mean, they want us?" "I don't know," Jax admitted, his hands clenching in frustration. "But I think we've been pulled into something much larger than we realized. This isn't a random encounter. It's planned. They know who we are." The room fell into an uneasy silence. The full implications of Jax's words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was clear now that this wasn't just an alien attack. It was a prelude to something much more dangerous. The alien fleet had been waiting for the Null, and now that they had found it, they weren't going to let it go. A new plan began to form in Elara's mind, a desperate, reckless plan that might give them a fighting chance. "Jax, send out a response. Make it look like we're complying, that we're part of whatever they're expecting. If they think we're aligned with them, we might be able to buy enough time to figure out what's really going on." Jax didn't hesitate. "Aye, Captain. Sending response now." The Null's communications system hummed to life, and a message, unspoken, but clear, was sent to the lead alien ship. Elara watched as the tactical screen flickered, waiting for a response. But it wasn't the message itself that worried her. It was the unsettling realization that they had just become pawns in a much larger game, one that no one, not even the Federation, could have predicted. And as the alien ships began to adjust their formations, Elara couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was just beginning. The Null was no longer just fighting for survival. The stakes had risen. Elara had put her trust in a dangerous gamble, pretending to align with an unknown force. And now, with the alien fleet seemingly awaiting their next move, she faced the terrifying truth. The Null's role in this conflict might be far greater than anyone could have imagined. Would they survive this encounter? Or would they be drawn further into a war they couldn't comprehend? The answers were waiting, just beyond the next moment. The minutes stretched on as the HSS Null drifted through space, its hull battered but still intact. The alien fleet had eased back into formation after Elara's calculated response. They had bought themselves some time, but time was a luxury they could not afford to squander. Every moment felt like a countdown, and the unease in the crew had only grown as the silence between them and the enemy stretched on. The signal they had sent was an act of desperation, a way to stall for more time. But Elara knew the truth. They couldn't keep pretending. The fleet was watching them, waiting. And the question was no longer about survival. It was about how far they could push their luck before the enemy realized they weren't really on their side. Cap, we're not getting any more responses from the fleet, Jack said, his voice low and tense. They're not saying anything, they're just waiting. Elara's eyes were fixed on the tactical display, her mind racing. Every piece of data she had gathered, every moment of contact with these ships, pointed toward something far larger than an invasion. This wasn't an attack in the traditional sense. It was something more complicated, something deeply woven into the fabric of the galaxy's unknown history. They've been waiting for us, she murmured under her breath, more to herself than to Jax. For the Null, this ship, it's part of something bigger. Jax shot her a glance, brow furrowed. What do you mean? The Federation abandoned the Null, Elara said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it wasn't just a failed project. It was a prototype, a testbed for technology we didn't understand, technology we stole from someone, from them. Jax froze. You mean, these ships? These aliens? Elara nodded, her expression grim. They're not here to destroy us, not yet anyway. They're here to retrieve something the Federation has been hiding. The tactical screen flickered suddenly, breaking the silence. The alien fleet began to shift, moving into a more concentrated formation. The lead ship pulsed once more with energy, its signal a clear, powerful call that rang through space, almost as if it were reverberating off the walls of the galaxy itself. This is it, Elara whispered, her voice tense with the realization that the confrontation was about to escalate. They're going to make their move. We have to act now. She turned to Jax, her mind already racing through possibilities. Prepare to engage. We don't know what their next step will be, but we can't wait for them to come to us. We have to force their hand. Jax didn't hesitate. Aye, Captain. Preparing evasive maneuvers and weapon systems now. But Captain, he looked at her, the uncertainty clear in his gaze. Are we really going to attack? We don't know what we're dealing with. They're not just aliens. This could be something we've never faced before. I know, Elara replied, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. But we don't have a choice. We're the only ones who can stop them. Her words hung in the air, pregnant, with meaning. The Federation had no idea this was happening. They had no way of knowing what was about to unfold, and that was the core of Elara's fear, that whatever this alien force was, it had been waiting for a catalyst. And the Null was it. With a deep breath, Elara gave the order. Engage. Target the lead ship's energy signature. We take it down. First. The Null's weapons hummed to life, the secondary turrets firing once more. The beams of concentrated energy streaked through the blackness of space, striking the lead ship's defenses. This time they didn't recoil. Instead, the alien vessel absorbed the blasts with ease, its shields flickering momentarily, before strengthening again. Elara watched the data pour in, each failed strike sending a ripple of frustration through her crew. But then something changed. A new wave of energy, far more intense than before, surged from the alien fleet. The lead ship was no longer just reacting. It was coordinating. "They're preparing something," Jack said, his voice rising with alarm. "This isn't just a standard counterattack. They're gearing up for something bigger." Before Elara could respond, a ripple of light exploded from the lead ship, expanding outward in a massive wave. The Null lurched violently, its systems scrambling. To compensate for the gravitational distortion that followed, Elara's hands flew across the control panel as she fought to maintain control. "What the hell was that?" she shouted, barely keeping her composure. The ship's stabilizers whined in protest as the shockwave from the alien weapon tore at their defenses. "They've opened a rift," Jax gasped, eyes wide. "That wave, it's some sort of dimensional distortion." A chill ran down Elara's spine. The rift flickered again, wider this time, and a new ship began to emerge from the other side. A gargantuan vessel, dwarfing the lead ship. The new arrival was unlike anything they had ever seen. A mass of intricate tendrils and shifting structures that seemed to warp reality around them. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a being that defied the very nature of existence. It's not a ship," Elara breathed, her voice filled with a sense of both dread and awe. "It's a living entity. It's alive." Jax's voice trembled. "We're not dealing with an invasion. We're dealing with something much older. This is a warning." The massive alien ship, if it could even be called that, pulsed with an energy that seemed to warp the very fabric of space. The Null's systems struggled to stay online, their readings fluctuating wildly as the ship buckled under the intensity of the force. "Get us out of here," Jack shouted. "We're not equipped for this kind of fight. We need to retreat." Elara's mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. This was it. The moment where everything changed. She could see it now. These ships, these beings, weren't just here for the Null. They were here for the Federation, for humanity. And the Null was the key. Without hesitation, Elara made her decision. "Not yet," she said, voice firm as she turned toward the viewfinder. The vast shifting form of the alien entity loomed ahead, its tendrils swirling ominously. This was no longer about survival. It was about finding a way to control the chaos. She tapped the console, engaging a sequence of emergency protocols buried deep within the Null's systems. "All crew, brace yourselves." The Null lurched forward, heading directly toward the alien entity. Elara knew that this was their only shot. They couldn't outrun it, but they might be able to understand it, to disrupt whatever terrible design had been set into motion. Her hands gripped the controls, her crew watching in silent disbelief as the ship shot forward, aiming straight for the heart of the alien power. The moment of truth had arrived. The ship tore toward the living entity, the unknown looming larger with every passing second. In that moment, Elara felt the weight of 1,000 decisions pressing on her shoulders. Was this truly the right choice? Or was this a gamble that would cost them everything? Either way, they would soon know, and the galaxy, humanity itself, would never be the same again. The HSS Null hurtled toward the living entity at the heart of the alien fleet, its engines roaring in defiance as the ship pushed through the distortions and gravitational fluctuations caused by the rift. The crew was tense, strapped into their stations, barely able to comprehend what was happening. There was no turning back now. Elara had made her choice. Now all she could do was see it through. "Cap, they're locking onto us," Jax shouted, his hands flying across the controls. "The energy readings are off the charts if we don't break through their defenses." "I know," Elara replied, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "But we don't have time to retreat. We need to get to the core of that thing." We need to understand it or we won't survive. The massive alien entity loomed larger on the viewfinder, its tendrils stretching out into the void like an ancient creature awakening from a long slumber. It pulsed with an energy that defied logic, its very presence warping the space around it. The Null was no longer just a warship. It was the last hope of a galaxy that had no idea what it was about to face. Suddenly, a crackling voice came over the comm system, distorted by the vast distance and interference. It was the lead alien ship, but its message wasn't directed at the Null. It was directed at the living entity itself. "You have come." The voice reverberated through the ship's speakers, alien in tone but unmistakably clear. "It is time. The reckoning will begin." Elara's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a signal, a catalyst for something much bigger, a beginning, perhaps even the end. The alien fleet had been waiting for the Null, but now, it seemed the true objective had been revealed. The Null was no longer just a symbol. It was the ignition point for something far more catastrophic. "We're almost there," Elara said, her voice tight with determination. The Null was now mere kilometers away from the living entity. It was as if the ship itself were rejecting their presence, pushing back with an intensity that made the walls of the command deck shudder. Jax's voice cut through the tension. "Cap, they're destabilizing the rift. It's expanding. Everything around us is being pulled in. If we don't stop this, the entire system could collapse." Elara's grip tightened on the control panel. "We need to break through to the core. We need to disrupt whatever this is before it escalates." Without hesitation, she gave the order. "Target the core. All weapons. Fire." The Null's remaining weapon systems fired in unison, the last of its energy reserves unleashing, a concentrated barrage toward the center of the alien entity. The blasts were absorbed by the entity's shifting mass, but the distortion seemed to grow even more intense, as if the entity were merely playing with them. The ship rattled under the strain, and alarms blared as the Null's systems fought to keep pace with the growing instability. "We're not going to get through," Jax yelled. "We can't destroy it, it's too powerful." Elara's mind raced. They were running out of time, and she could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This was it, the moment where everything could either fall into chaos or break free from it. She glanced at the data streaming across the screen. There was only one way to stop the entity. "Eject the core," Elara said, her voice cutting through the panic that had started to creep into the room. "Now!" The crew moved quickly, their actions precise but filled with a quiet desperation. The ship's main reactor was a power source capable of destabilizing the rift, and it was their last chance to sever the link between the Null and the alien entity. The crew worked in unison, the hum of the Null's systems reaching a fever pitch as they initiated the ejection sequence. The ship groaned as the core detached, releasing a blinding surge of energy. The Null shuddered violently, its internal systems screaming in protest. Elara's hands were firmly locked on the controls as she fought to keep the ship on course, even as everything around her seemed to be falling apart. In the moment of ejection, the living entity reacted. A surge of energy, far more intense than anything they had faced before, shot out from the heart of the rift. The core, now detached, was engulfed by the wave of energy. The Null was thrown backward by the force, the ship tumbling out of control. For a split second, Elara thought it was over, but then the rift began to collapse in on itself. The living entity recoiled as if repelled by the energy from the core. The tendrils that had once stretched out into the galaxy began to retract, pulling back into the depths of the rift. The energy wave faltered, dissipating in a chaotic swirl of light and shadow. The Null lurched again, but this time the force wasn't destructive. It was as if the ship were finally being freed from the pull of the alien entity. The rift began to stabilize, the energy readings leveling off. The crew sat in stunned silence. The ship had survived, barely, but the implications of what had just transpired were too massive to comprehend. Elara felt a wave of exhaustion crash over her as the tension slowly ebbed away. She looked around at her crew, all of them silently, processing what they had just experienced. "Status report," Elara barked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had just happened. Core ejected successfully, Jax reported, his voice still shaken. The rift is closing. Energy levels are stabilizing. The tension in the room didn't ease, but there was a quiet relief. They had done it. They had stopped the rift from consuming everything. They had averted the catastrophe, at least for now. But as Elara stared out at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The Null had been the key, the catalyst that had triggered the opening of a gateway to something far beyond their understanding. And now, the galaxy had a new, terrifying question to face. What had they just unleashed? The rift was closing, but Elara knew their fight wasn't over. The alien fleet was still out there, and they would not forget the Null. More questions lingered in the silence, unanswered and unresolved. As the Null drifted away from the now collapsing rift, Elara couldn't help but wonder. Had they truly stopped the threat, or had they only delayed it? The answers were somewhere in the vast reaches of space waiting, and sooner or later they would find them. The HSS Null drifted silently through the vast expanse of space, its battered hull a testament to the fierce struggle it had just survived. The lights on the bridge were dim, flickering occasionally as the ship's systems recalibrated after the violent encounter. Elara stood alone, her hands clasped behind her back, staring out into the blackness of the universe. She had always found comfort in the stillness of space, but today it felt different. Unnervingly quiet. The galaxy had just changed, and she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The crew had begun to process what had happened, each in their own way. They had survived the unimaginable, but Elara couldn't shake the lingering feeling that they had only scratched the surface of something far more dangerous, something they were ill-prepared to face. The alien fleet was no longer a direct threat, but its purpose, its origins, still haunted her thoughts. And the entity in the rift? It was alive, ancient, far older than anything humanity had ever encountered. Captain. Jax's voice broke into her thoughts. He stood just behind her, his expression unreadable. We've received a message. It's not from the Federation, but it's coming from deep space, something we haven't encountered before. Elara turned slowly to face him, her gaze sharp. What kind of message? Jax paused, then handed her a datapad. The screen displayed a string of symbols, alien, intricate, and far more complex than anything they had decoded before. She studied them for a long moment, her mind trying to make sense of the patterns. It's the same type of signal we picked up before, Jax continued. But this one is different. It's directed at us, and there's something unsettling about it. Elara frowned, stepping forward to get a closer look. The symbols on the screen danced before her eyes, an unfamiliar language that felt like it had been waiting for them. Her instincts told her that this wasn't a simple transmission. This was something more, something sent for a reason. Prepare the ship, Elara ordered, her voice. Elara ordered, her voice calm but carrying an underlying urgency. We're going to investigate. I want to know who's behind this, and I want to know why they're reaching out to us. Jax nodded, his expression serious but resolute. Aye, Captain. As he left the bridge to relay the orders, Elara stood there for a moment longer, her fingers lightly brushing the datapad. The message had been meant for them, for the Null, for humanity. It was clear now. They weren't done. The galaxy had more secrets, secrets that were being unearthed at an alarming rate. The Null had been the first, the key to unlocking something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The rift had closed, the alien fleet had withdrawn, but Elara knew the real battle was just beginning. This message was only the beginning of a larger, more terrifying story. They had stirred something in the darkness, and it would not rest until it had been satisfied. Elara stepped away from the command console, her gaze once again fixed on the stars outside. The Null was not just a ship anymore. It was a beacon, a symbol of humanity's place in the universe. And whatever awaited them out there beyond the stars, they would face it together, no matter the cost. The screen went black. The silence of space hung heavy in the air, the echoes of an unknown future calling.